Any questions, any thoughts, reactions, emotions, cognitive thinking?
We just have the first question here.
And do me a favor, just introduce yourself so that we start to get a sense of who's in the room.
Yes, well, my name is Mark, I'm from the Netherlands, and so is my colleague Piet, and behind me is Sarah from Belgium, and we have both, well, the three of us have basically the same question, and that concerns your second proposition,
yes.
Second this discussion point. Because we were wondering how you were thinking to achieve that, embedding student values in schools. That's what you were saying. And we were believing that participation of the parents is, for instance, an essential prerequisite for reaching to that level. So we were just wondering if you could elaborate more on that.
Yeah, so I'm going to repeat your question, even though I think everybody may have heard it, but I was told I have to repeat the question. So as I understand it, the question from the contingent from the Netherlands, pardon? And Belgium, thank you. They would like to invite us to beer later. No, I'm just kidding. Oh, good. Good. Don't you like the way I worked that in? Okay, but my point is this. Their question was, how, in terms of that second proposition, which is about surfacing student deeply held values attached to this history, how do you go about doing that? Do you involve parents? When do you involve parents, if you do? And what I want to congratulate you, because I like the way you said this was from three of you, so I don't have to take three questions. I can just answer this one now. But so here's what I want to suggest. I think there are places where, and this, in the US, this varies tremendously. So I grew up in the Northeast. I now live in the Midwest. In the Midwest, people are generally very, very polite. In my classrooms, they're not sarcastic. They're not. There's a level of earnestness that's very, very different than the Northeast in the US, where there's more sarcasm, more irony, more where bitterness is sort of more part of the discourse. I mean, I'm making vague generalizations about regional dialects, discourse patterns. But the reason I'm doing it is because I think, again, this is one of those questions that's utterly contextual, because if I'm teaching in a school where I know that it's politically homogeneous, and that to bring up politically vexing orientations is problematic, then I don't want to invite my parents in. I want to do something that allows that discourse to flourish in this classroom in a protected way, so that it's, and I'm not saying that we hide what we're doing as teachers from parents, only that I think my goal is to be able to keep teaching in addition to educating students, because that's what I think we ought to be doing as teachers. So what I won't make are any pronouncements about how we do that precisely vis-a-vis different territories and different nationalist paths and different notions even of what's at play in different kinds of discussions. But so we could take a really heated, obvious one, I think, which is, what do you do with kids who are in your classrooms who say, you know, let's take an Israeli Arab in an Israeli school who's saying that you're a state actor telling me that the Holocaust happened as part of an oppressive regime, and I don't believe the Holocaust happened as a result. I will answer the right questions on the test, but I don't believe it. So there's a sort of beautiful example of, well, we could argue about whether that's a counter-narrative, or we could say that's actually it's a non-narrative, right? It's not a historically based narrative at all. It's a denial. Do we even want to legitimize that denial by bringing it up in class? Are we in a context where we can do that? With which kinds of political consequences? What are we doing to our kids? So I'm not saying there's an easy way to do this, but happily Zvi Beckerman is going to talk to us about that later. But we do have a lot of research on how people manage contested narratives. So Alan McCulley, who's looked at Irish Catholics and Irish Protestants in Northern Ireland, and talks about the emotional, effectual range that has to be in place in order to really engage in a smart, safe way people's deeply held conflicting oppositional narratives. I think there are lots of mechanisms. I don't think there's one way. How's that for a really long-winded answer to a really great question? Thank you. Any other questions? Or have I just suitably taken up all the hour?
Well, I'm Monique Esman. I had almost the same question. First of all, I just wanted to thank you, and I was so happy to find in your talks social class and conflict. I think this is basics. But I also wanted to go along the same line and just, when you deal with the separate narratives, how far can you really go with Holocaust denial? I wanted to hear you a bit more about real denial, like you can find it on the internet, and maybe not with small school kids, but with 15 to 18-year-olds.
So here's what I want to. Here's the way I want to argue for real deliberation of utterly controversial issues, and I don't think we start by doing that. And let me give you an example. I really believe strongly that there are particular pedagogical formats that are designed to teach particular skill sets, and that we ought to use them in very particular and very scaffolded ways. So as an example, there's a format for teaching kids how to deliberate. It's called structured academic controversy. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. It was developed in the 70s. Some teacher education programs use it, some don't. But essentially, it's a way of diffusing complex issues emotionally, teaching kids how to deliberate without getting angry, and so you start, when I teach teachers about how to deal with controversial issues, generally speaking, and then we'll move up into, deep issues of identity. You don't start with, do you believe the Holocaust happened? You don't start with, should abortion be legal in the US? You start with a structured academic controversy that's removed somewhat from their own deeply held convictions, but where you teach them the skill set. So as an example, should, I don't know, I'm going to give you a non-Holocaust one. Should the Elgin marbles be returned to Greece? In the US, that's not really very controversial for most students, right? That's it. No, really it isn't. I mean, here it might be, so it might not be a good example. But so should Nazi looted possessions be returned? That's not deeply emotional. And here I'm talking about American classrooms with diverse kids, most of whom are not Jewish. So you start by learning a skill set applied to a historical terrain that's somewhat removed, but has resonances thematically, right? So you build the skill set such that you move up into, so let's say you have now, let's say you've done a bunch of SACs, let's say you have a really safe classroom environment where you as the teacher are trusted as an adult, as someone who's going to respect all your kids. You move into this arena of being able to talk about the deepest, hardest issues, and I've seen it done. And I think many of us have had moments of that in our teaching careers, where you have a moment with a class where you can really get at the deepest, hardest stuff. Maybe we're in university settings, maybe we're even with young kids. It's sometimes easier with young kids, but sometimes it isn't. It just matters. All of these different contextual factors have to constellate together in order to be able to get to that point of actually deliberating deeply held conflicts. And I think that skill set is incredibly powerful cognitively, emotionally, politically, and it's exactly what we need for democracies to flourish rather than be in sort of strangle-held places of non-deliberation where, So if I had answered this question 10 years ago, I have to tell you, I would have aligned myself with Deborah Lipstadt and said, at the time, and said, you don't discuss Holocaust denial, you don't legitimize Holocaust denial, because legitimizing Holocaust denial is immoral as a teacher. And I've come to a place, and I this is a sort of tricky spot, I think, but I've come to a place where I don't believe anymore that we can rule out certain narratives because they don't enable us to get to a point of understanding. It's precisely who said this? Somebody said this over lunch, but there's a lovely study about Israeli and Palestinian kids talking about or Israeli Arab and Israeli Jewish kids talking about Nakba and Holocaust, and there are all kinds of constraints about what kind of discourse you can have, and that's legally mandated constraints on that kind of discourse. But as soon as you recognize your other, the historical experiences that bring you to these contested places, you don't have to end up agreeing on everything. It's like a good marriage, I think. I've heard of them. I don't know firsthand, but I think it's the kind of thing where you don't have to agree on everything. You have to learn to understand each other. And I'm not saying we should marry the people we fight with. I'm just saying, you understand what I'm saying? I'm saying we have to, that the real work of teaching is sophisticated, is hard, and ought to be professionally recognized, professionally paid for, because it does precisely what we want it to do. And those people who argue against the professionalization of teachers and the cutting down of the public sphere don't want us to be doing that. But that doesn't mean it's not a worthy goal. So how's that for another long-winded answer? Anyway, I want to thank you so much and just say this. I want to make sure we have fabulous time for Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblett. So let me just turn and do a little teacher moment for you. Ready? Take your right arm. You know what I'm going to do? Because I taught elementary school for a long time. Take either arm. I don't care. Take your left arm. Make it a political statement. Take your left arm. Stretch it as far as you can up to the ceiling. Go ahead. Wave it around. Pat yourselves on the back. Okay, thank you.